To this computer. There you go, baby.
Thank you. You
Hmm.
guys are amazing. All right, we're going to take it from the top. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your Saturday afternoon to look at some data with us. Um, just as a reminder, we did this survey all the way back in February. Thank you so much for being patient with me. We had a lot of fun doing the survey, and we're going to go over kind of the high level findings throughout. You're going to see things not packaged in like, oh, this was how people answered to this question and this question. It is more about the deep findings. I really went through with like a fine-tooth comb and went through all of the open ends. You're going to see lots of quotes from people specifically highlighted. And otherwise, I always really appreciate comments. So if you're watching this in the future or if you're in chat, thank you so much for leaving them. I read every single one and highlight ones that are really, really good that I think sum up some of the themes that we kind of see in analysis. So I'll dig right in and I'm going to hand it to Peter to talk about some of the survey background and sort of the purpose for why we had done this.
CID is a big game and it's an old game. CID started, I think, in the year 2000, if not 99. And at this point, it's a lot more than a game being hosted at the Ohio State University Union between 12 to 15 people. Columbus in Darkness now spans 3 generations of players. And I remember the first time someone brought a kid to games, this is before we had the 18 and over only rule. People used to be able to bring their kids, and it started happening. And I was like, wow, that's weird. And
Mhm.
now here I am, 40 years old with 3 of my own kids. Life moves on whether you like it or not. And part of life moving on is games change, values change, and the game that I came into 25 years ago is certainly not the same game that we're playing now. And as we've kind of hit this renaissance of vampire LARP at Columbus in Darkness and really throughout not just One World by Night, but just the US as a whole. It's strange to walk in and look around and be like, what are people here for? What's the draw? Once upon a time, it used to be power. I want to come in, I want to be the prince, and I'm going to kill everybody between me and the throne. And that's the fun we're going to have, is just grinding through this. And it's going to be a new prince every 3 months. And it's a game about combat and mechanics. And if you've got fleetness agents and puissance on your sheet, then you're a cheese monkey and people are going to brand you as that. Now, a year ago, I came in, I was like, we've got a lot of people. We're pulling 40 players, and I don't know why we can't get people to sign up for whip positions, or nobody wants to be a primogen. We can't get people to be the keeper. What are the values people are looking for? Uh, it doesn't seem like it's power. It doesn't seem like it's combat. Do people just want a social event that's outside of their house because COVID has touched the American public in ways we're still figuring out? Are people just looking for new outlets to make friends? Are there deeper stories going on that we're just not seeing because they're happening behind closed doors? So Jasmine and I started talking about this, and Jasmine's got a very strong background in industrial organizational psychology and games research. And I have my background in psychology, and we started having some deeper conversations about, again, what are people looking for, and how do we make the best game possible? How do we find common things that we're all looking for, even if they're new concepts that we're not aware we're looking for yet? And the goal with this thing is to get feedback from the active player base, and start to quantify the data and present it to the game as a whole, in the hopes that people see that there are play styles or values out there that maybe they agree with that they weren't thinking about before, or maybe opportunities to play the game in new ways and make these new connections and do exciting stuff through that. So, understanding what others are looking for can really help us start to experience and take advantage of the new opportunities that are out there, and show people these alternative play styles, so new players can come into old concepts and older players can bridge out into where the new generation is at. So the key questions that we're looking at through this presentation are going to be, who is in CID demographically? What's the character? What's the Chronicles background as far as the duration that people have been exposed to not only LARP as a whole, but Vampire the Masquerade as a specific product? We've got a lot of people who are coming in and this is their first exposure to both LARP and Vampire. And we've got some people like me and some of the other players that have been doing this for decades. How do players feel? How did players feel about CID overall when the survey was initially released back in February of 2025? What were we doing well? And what was there that we should look at improving? What do players enjoy the most about CID and the Vampire product? What themes and topics are they the most interested in? And something I really like that we designed the survey to do was to touch on predefined categories, and there's a lot of write into. And that was a real eye opener looking at the data because there was basic stuff in there that I was surprised that Jasmine and I both missed that had very strong feedback. Like somehow we missed politics as a favored theme, and that one got a lot of write-ins. So definitely some room for us to improve this thing the second time around. But it's nice to see the people that were filling the surveys out weren't asleep at the wheel and really putting some thought into what they were doing. And which pieces of player feedback were mentioned the most often. And by seeing repetition of data or a repetition of answers, you're able to establish, hey, this is a priority, and this is something that we as players and staff need to be mindful of like, hey, that's a hot button topic. Let's really exploit it. Let's take advantage of it. And let's see what kind of fun we can have with this.
Excellent work. Yes. And so to that, I'm glad that you spoke on this being kind of an iterative process because this is something that we are kind of piloting for the first one. The best research is iterative. Science never stops. You go in a circle forever and ever, and that's what's lovely about it. So I want to speak to kind of in the sort of scope of what the survey can really talk to, what it can't. Every piece of research isn't without gaps, and I want to be very upfront about those. So the survey can give us insight into what players might like most and least, at least from 6 months ago. There are certain parts of this in terms of satisfaction with particular pieces that are going to be out of date just because there have been changes. When the survey went out, I think it was right before we had moved to 2 games a month. So that's something to consider. It's just that there's some parts of this that are not going to be as timely, but things like people's general preferences and what they're looking for in game, or pieces of feedback that were, very poignant and we haven't seen sort of a change in that are still going to, be relevant. Things like the Chronicle's strengths and weaknesses, and then sort of those general trends again in people's play preferences. But the survey isn't without gaps. We got about 25 responses from folks. There was some data cleaning that was done, but that's not close to the 70 plus people that SID draws on sort of a biweekly basis. And so this is going to speak to, the most engaged or invested players. They're probably overrepresented in the sample. You see that in a ton in games research. The people who are willing to sit down and take a long survey are the people who really want to be heard. And so I think that that's sort of a way of framing this is that these are a few people who have opinions that they really wanted to kind of get in front of other people. But in terms of it being able to speak to the entirety, like you can't layer these as percentages over the entirety of the player base. Very intentionally, as you'll see throughout, all of my graphs that I have shown are all in whole numbers. And that is to really emphasize that this is not something that you can apply to the general population of SID, but it is directionally helpful. All right, so we're going to jump right in and we're going to jump into the Chronicle feedback first. How SID players feel, what is it doing well, what do players like most about being in the game, and then what are the pain points and what are things that players would like to see improve or change. So huge win. I don't think anybody is surprised to see this, but players are very enthusiastic about Sid's very large, very welcoming community. This question here, the overall, how would you rate your satisfaction with Sid, is the very first question I think at the onset that's asked, and that's really just speaking to it overall, and that is glowing. Like that is amazing, honestly, that people are sitting in sort of that like 4 to 5 range. We call that a top two box in data science, is like what are the top, like what's the percentage of people who are sitting in like, the top two rankings. And so that's amazing to see that so many people are overall just like really enthusiastic about being there, that the player community is so open and welcoming. Like there's that's amazing that you guys have cultivated such a large community that people still feel very seen in. And that was spoken about both in and out of character, very much out of character of I feel like people want me to be here. And that's self-sustaining. When you have a community that is very large that people want to be a part of, they bring their friends and then you keep on growing. And then you end up with where Sid is at now with, that pull of 70 to 80 people on a biweekly basis, which is bonkers. Again, kind of mentioned that I pulled out particular quotes, and I would very much encourage people to kind of go through the deck later. I'm not going to have time to kind of like linger, but I've tried to bold the things that really tie into kind of themes that I'm seeing here of when people are asked about their favorite parts of being in Sid. It's big supportive community. People are very welcoming. The staff is very supportive. The quality of role play, we're going to get into that in the next slide. The culture is very fun. Getting new players involved. People being very good at sort of those out of character check-ins. So people just feel very safe. And so I don't think that this is a surprise to anyone, but I just wanted to kind of like start with that because it was extremely effusive. This was probably the most effusive and positive that people were about anything in the survey. And that's amazing. So, next thing we'll jump into um, is that Sid was also just consistently praised for, that quality and quantity of role play, that we are a big game, but people feel like they're getting a lot out of sort of that person to person role play. And so when you think about those pieces kind of together, right, it makes a lot of sense why Columbus, on top of just sort of its geographical location, why people in Ann Arbor and from Pennsylvania are driving in, are willing to drive, long distances to be a part of the community that's here, just because of the quality that they have access to and that quantity. You have more chances to do the thing. It feels very worthwhile. And so I think that's something I really want to like com emphasize here is just that what you have built has the power to draw people to make that long drive that they normally would for something like Gen Con or a big event game. You guys have the pull of an event game on a biweekly basis, and that's freaking bonkers. And you should be very proud for the kind of culture that you guys have built, the fact that it is a large player base where I think I've heard stories from Peter in the old days where it was referred to as the killing fields, where it was just, people coming in and you would get slaughtered. And that is not the vibe that people are getting from the game anymore. That there is, a big influx of new players. And I really want to, the next slide is going to talk even more about that. Just this large influx of new players that are bringing, a different style of the game to the table, that there's plot and drama and intrigue. There's lots of PC generated plot. And so when you're talking about, that uh, uh, flavor that people can kind of have access to on a routine basis, I think that that's something that we should feel really, really good about. And when we think about why people are willing to kind of make those big jumps, that's why. I will take a moment. The capture form. Is the audience, is it not working in terms of the questions? Ba, ba, ba.
Sorry, this Q&A session is closed.
Let me, oops. Let me try one more time. Let me drag that here. Can I drag it here? I will attempt to, yeah, Google is very mean. They're like, do you want to drop this thing in Zoom? You're not allowed to do that. It's okay. We're going to turn off questions and then it won't take up stuff on the slide. If you just want us to post your questions here and just put question and then a colon, and then I'll like be able to pick them out easily. Thank you guys so much. All right. So with that break, I'm going to dig into kind of the things that people raised that were a little bit more complex or a little bit more negative. The issues that were raised, because we did ask people kind of about their tenure and whatnot, gave kind of an interesting sense of what the issues people are seeing on because like the issues that people are seeing are the same, but how they're internalizing them and experiencing them can be a little different. So when you kind of look at sort of that new player experience, when you look at, that is it easy to get started as a new player in Sid? No, it is not. It is very, very hard. There are some people that agree, but a lot of the people who are in that strongly disagree piece of the pie are people who are newer. So it's a perception, I think, from some, more established players, more tenured players, that it might be easier to get started than it really is. A lot of new players are like, this shit sucks, honestly. It's very, very hard. And there are in character and out of character barriers, and we'll dig into that more. So things like out of character, I can easily spot fun things to do. Most people agree, but there is sort of still that like, I'm not quite sure. I feel like I might get there. There aren't, very many strongly disagrees. And so I want there to be some nuance to that. But things can be very, very mixed. And so when you look at these graphs, like I feel like an active participant in the in-game world, where you see sort of this like, oh, it's a very mixed bag. It's very, very likely to be that like new player sort of integrating sort of in. And we have many new players who are very successful. And again, this is data that was collected 6 months ago. There have been a lot of changes. This is like a very like pre-GE sort of survey. So I would love to run this again in a month or something. And turning this around will not take nearly as much time because all of the stuff is done. But I think that that's something we're speaking to. And so when you dig into sort of the data of when you ask people, like, what are your least favorite parts? I've sort of highlighted and I've called out the tenure on these comments because I want to make sure that it's clear, like, which perspective these are able to speak to. Really big barrier for new players, that, like, it doesn't feel like you can get involved in plot if there's not enough on your sheet, or that if you don't have access to people who have access to that plot. Big sheets tend to solve problems very quickly is another one too, of like, oh, maybe this is going to be like a large thing that I can get involved in, but oh, it's just solved so quickly because somebody, with more on their sheet is able to kind of like nip that in the bud before it becomes something larger. Um, Power creep is something that is mentioned a lot, and I don't feel like that is anything new to anyone. The piece of that I want to dig into, especially with power creep, and I highlighted it in this first one here, is I can't have antagonistic interactions of like there is sort of that fear of like I would like to have sort of, that bristle with people socially, I see, but like what are the consequences for me for doing that? Like, is it going to be, am I going to have an interaction with someone who can navigate that conflict with nuance, with that understanding of like, yes, this is a person with like 10 years less XP on their sheet. How do I handle this with nuance out of character without, pulling punches in a sense that feels, like genre breaking? And I think that that's sort of something that you see throughout is like finding that balance between genre and how are you navigating sort of these in-character systems when the out of character disparity is so great. And this kind of ties in. These are all about kind of that uh, uh, picture that we're seeing painted between new players and veteran players. And I have a couple that are from veteran players here, and these are sort of two that kind of highlighted that like, oh, I'm sort of frustrated because I see new players who like don't seem to understand genre, or they don't have a familiarity with the rules. And I feel like the comment that I highlighted on the right here did a really great job of being like, I see these problems, but this isn't new players' fault. Like these are things that we as a game need to be able to teach them when they're coming in, of these incidents where somebody will make a character who has a backstory that is just really, really difficult to navigate in character or justify in character. The things where you're like, oh, my sire, embraced me and dropped me off somewhere. And it's like, but you're also acknowledged in the Camarilla. Like none of making those pieces make sense is something that like we as a game and those who are a bit more tenured have to be better about helping folks with. And it'll save a lot of, time and frustration for people when they're, role playing and they don't have their immersion broken, or a new player isn't, locked into a backstory that like they end up not being able to explore in the way that they want to because there were nuances that they didn't know they were going to have to navigate. And so that comment in the right left hand, I feel like is highlights something that I've seen both in this piece of research and also just interacting with Sid, is that there are a number of new players who are like way more familiar with VTM genre than you would think, who understand that there is that sort of innate powerlessness that's supposed to come from being, a neonate or a less powerful vampire, and that that's part of genre. But that the gap that exists in, not just Sid, but like all of One World because of the continuous chronicle, makes it really, really difficult to kind of like, even within genre, like really make those jumps. So yeah, I have a lot of sympathy on kind of both sides of this. And I definitely want to emphasize here is that a lot of new players are like, I just want to be involved. I want to like be able to be successful in this game. And I really want to shout out a lot of the veteran players who spoke to this as well, because it was done with a lot of nuance and consideration for how it feels to be a new player. So I think that we grew really fast, and that came with a lot of growing pains all at once. It felt like things sort of exploded after COVID. And now this is sort of we're trying to figure out what the population kind of looks like and what these sorts of pain points are now that we have exploded, as Peter kind of talked about. So
And
the
as a
next,
reminder, real quick, too, like again,
yes,
this is stuff that was examined in February. Nobody was quiet about what was on the survey. And I think the survey prompted a lot of people to start having smaller conversations locally. I can tell you, being there for bi-monthly play or bi-weekly play, a lot of this has already seen a lot of repair work done at a player level. So it's expressed here because this is a snapshot of February. That's not to say these are things that are needling us as furiously right now.
yes, very, very much so. Again, this snapshot in time, I would be very curious to see what these look like now, again, in sort of the post GE world, things sort of settling and new players becoming less new and just sort of integrating with genre and the game a little bit more. So yes. And this kind of gets into a piece that I would also be interested in seeing how it's changed since February, is that the rapid growth of Sid has really, really strained admin support and game logistics. And so you hear that in the form of, um, ST time is really hard to get as a new player. And that's something that kind of ties in with that. Like, I would just like more plot. Like, I would like to see things that I, as a new player, can get involved in. That's something that kind of comes up in other comments that people raise that we'll dig into more in terms of things that people would like to see. But like this top one that someone called out of like, I've just given up on trying to do downtime activities because I don't feel like I'm going to get a response. You see things like, my understanding of how to use in-character influences is pretty not great, all things considered. Even among sort of folks who might be coming back to the game or are a bit more tenured, maybe things have changed because of, bylaws or change in admin where people just don't feel as comfortable using influences as they should. Finding information to navigate the game, also very difficult for some folks. So I think that there is sort of this logistics problem that we know exists. There isn't enough admin, and this is by no means a like admin bad. Like it is just there are so many people in this game now that like you can only do so much. So how do we use the resources that we do have available to be effective, and how should those resources be allocated in terms of making sure that people feel like they're getting the support that they need so that they can have the fun kind of game that they want. So Something that we also dug into is like, so what do players want us to do more? What do they want us to focus on? What recommendations do they have? And a lot of it kind of did fall into that, like, I just want better game logistics and better processes. I would love to have primers on, how do I get started in Sid, or how do I get started playing a particular clan? And there are things like, those genre packets and whatnot, but those, go through various like revisions. I know the Ventru stuff is I think still in process at the moment. So just making sure that we stay on top of like, oh, these things are changing. What does this mean for our game? Oh, you want to roll this particular character. These are all of the, materials that you should have, the sort of like required reading, so to speak. Being able to handle downtimes better. Having actual documentation around, how should those be structured? What day are they supposed to be submitted into? Are we using email or Holler? Just having more streamlined, determined processes. Because once those things are also written down, it's easier for other players to provide those materials and provide some of that admin support. People are very, very dedicated. So use the player base in that way by just writing things down and making them easier to kind of share without admin help. Cleaning up house rules, those are things that we've also started doing internally. There's been lots more chatter in the last like couple months about things like bylaws and talking about kind of, you know, how we go and flag those things, how we get involved. Difficult to know who, staff are, like how do we kind of, create resources that give people easy ways to find who they're looking for. People talking about things like more roundtables and whatnot. That's been a topic that has come up a lot since February, and I'd be very curious to see, how that needle has moved. If there have been more roundtables, I believe that there have been, but again, this is still snapshot in time. We're still working on all of these, but this was when asked what players really said that they were looking for is just help me put better scaffolding around this game that I want to enjoy. Another thing that folks had mentioned was just like smaller ST plot that was more accessible to them, bringing plot lines down to that common man's level, more proactivity to kind of like seek people out who haven't had plot before, less big plot and just more small plot. And we're going to dig into kind of like what that looks like and why I think people have those opinions on these pieces when we dig into the preferences that we saw shortly. But those are sort of the big broad strokes things that when players were asked, they really, really wanted to see in terms of changes to game is just like, let's have better stuff out of character for navigating the game and knowing who to talk to, and just like smaller plots. That people can really like sink their teeth into that feel a little bit more personal. Because again, this is a game that really, really likes that, PC driven narrative, and we're really good at it. Another thing that I wanted to highlight here is that new players and veterans both talked about things like mentorship opportunities, both in character and out of character. So people having, like, is there a dedicated buddy that you can be like assigned when you're like a brand new player out of the box who doesn't know VTM or maybe just doesn't know Sid? Is there a dedicated person that we can point them to just kind of like ask the questions that like feel stupid but are actually just good? Asking questions is important, and people don't want to look stupid in games. And so it's important to give people a dedicated person for those sorts of that like onboarding experience. But people also talked about it in the context of like, IC mentorship, having things like a formalized accounting process for folks if they want to opt into something like that. I also really appreciated seeing messages from veteran players who were like, I would like these opportunities to be an IC mentor because it would like breathe new
In the
life
shower.
into this PT, into a PC.
Okay.
Oh no. But yes, so I think that this was something that I wanted to highlight. It came up in, I would say, fewer responses overall. But I really wanted to kind of highlight it here because there was sort of this interest from both veteran and new players on IC mentorship and out of character mentorship. So something that we should incentivize. We have a very big community that wants to help each other. Help your community help itself is sort of the takeaway there. All right. With consideration for time, We're going to get right into LARP preferences and kind of what people are looking for in the game. Honestly, the first part of this was the heaviest. So the rest of this should be a little bit easier to speak to. But yes, LARP preferences in general. What are SID players looking for in a VTM LARP? What are the themes and topics that we want to explore as a chronicle? Is there anything that needs to be handled with care or that people just like do not want to see or that is more niche? And like what systems and mechanics do folks enjoy using in SID? So we asked a bunch of questions in this sort of like this bucket of like how much do you enjoy each of the following? And so everything on this slide were the things that were really, really popular and people were very effusive about. And so when you really like dig into, the what the connection points between these options, things like player-driven drama, in-character gossip and drama, local in-character dilemmas, things like politics and status, and then resolving conflict with advanced narration, which big fan, very happy to see people are interested in that. When you look at those options, people are really interested in engaging in small scale, more intimate storytelling in SID. Lots of drama and about PC plot, local level plot that, doesn't necessarily require them to know PCs or NPCs or events that are happening, outside of our borders. Hashing out, conflict in, a more narrative and collaborative style as opposed to, going to chops. Doing lots of politicking. These are the things that I think SID players we're very effusive about and that we do really well right now as well in a lot of ways. But I think that this kind of goes to show that like these are the components of Vampire LARP that unify SID potentially. And would love to go and get another one of these out there so that we can, get more people and see if this is something that was very localized, to these very engaged players, or if this is really the picture that is painted across all of SID.
Before we jump off of that,
Yeah.
I just want to point out here the 12 people who responded level 4, which is underneath one of my favorite parts on the advanced narration, which is resolving conflicts without mechanics or rock paper scissors, really sounding out loud. We have traditionally been a very rules heavy, very mechanics heavy game, and to see things leaning towards a vibe from the player base where potentially player versus player interactions that, hey, I want to hit you in the face. Okay, I'm fine with that. Let's move the story along. Let's focus on that. Let's not get stuck in the mud on chops. Big deal to see that in the numbers here represented as strongly as it is.
Yes. And to that point too, nobody gave it a 1 or a 2. Everybody was a 3 or higher. So it's in terms of that swing of like it's not even it's lopsided. It is most people are at the very least feel neutral about it and are leaning positive. So I think that says a lot about the community again, that like, people do feel very safe and feel very supported by SID
Trust.
community. There's a lot of trust, right? There's a lot of trust that you need to have to be able to feel like you can look at the other person on the other side of a potential chop and be like, hi, do you want to just like work this out between us? Like, we don't need to get, White Wolf involved. And that's very valid. So away from that, where things do start to get more mixed, there are just a few things that I wanted to call out here that like were either very controversial or had like a really wide spread of, um, responses in kind of both directions. So solving things like these big domain threat type plots, item crafting, the weird homebrew stuff in White Wolf, where like the weird homebrew stuff, you have people who are mostly in that 9 who are like, I don't want peas in my potatoes. I don't want it. And then you have other people who are like, it depends on what it is. And then you have another group of people it's like one of my favorite parts. And then another group of people in those 3s who are like, I don't know what you're talking about at all. So I think that there's a point here, the is in that recommendation of like, these aren't, storytelling devices or mechanics that aren't, unpopular. Just think about using them more strategically. Like
I
when
think
go for it.
I think we didn't clear to define what homebrew was because as you're going through it, you're talking about stuff like custom content, homemade powers, chronicle made powers. When I put that question in there initially, I meant stuff that doesn't have a splat book behind it, like a Wendigo or uh, a animated puppet plot, like weird supernatural stuff that is not already represented in White Wolf. And I think that was a bad survey point on my end because it's confusing. So, and that's can be applied to any of these. Is what item crafting means to me isn't what item crafting might mean to the other people responding to this. So that
Sure.
is a variable I think we'll have to tighten up next time around.
I did kind of call this out in the text too, and I totally agree. There's a lot of lessons me and Peter have taken away from this that we want to like roll into the next one. Is something like item crafting is like that could be an issue of access. That is a system that requires a lot of documentation, and if we know the game is missing a lot of documentation, it could just be that, people don't enjoy it because they don't understand it, they don't know how to access it. There are a number of people who are in that like no opinion box for things like item crafting. And so the point here is like when you see these sorts of like mixed bag answer options where, people have this wide range, it's important to think about like, okay, well, why is that the case? And I think for that weird homebrew stuff, we do want to clarify kind of, what we mean by that. But I think even kind of at its high level without the specificity that we wanted to put on it, that you see sort of that wide range of like, I really just want to play vampire for some people. And other people are like, let's get crazy weird with it. Let's go into other splat books from other White Wolf properties. Let's get into, the stuff that somebody modded at home, so to speak. And so that openness can really, really vary. All right. So for the next one, these are sort of the things that kind of I wanted to highlight as being interesting because they had a lot of no opinion answer options or were very, very middling in one way or another. And my hypothesis as to why this is that they feel inaccessible. And it's sort of like that like item crafting one, where it's like things like feeding scene complications, influence usage, national and global, like one world dilemmas. Those feel like things where it's like, either people have access to them and they're sort of like, kind of whatever on them. But when you really think about it, it's like if an issue with the game, especially from the perspective of a lot of these survey takers from, newer players, are like a feeding scene complication requires an ST. And if there is an issue with an ST shortage, how many STs are really going to like go out of their way and derail, a short evening to have a very, very, intimate scene about feeding scene complications with people? Probably not many. So a lack of access. Things like influence usage, again, with all of that documentation that might be needed, with downtimes that, people just don't have access. And, the people who do understand it or are making do feel all right to positive about it. But again, it's an issue with folks not being able to get into it. And then same goes for things like the big one world dilemmas. Small sheets are not usually involved in those, or at the very least are involved in a very superficial way. Those are big plot, big sheet concerns that are like outside of the scope of what most people have to worry about. But what I think is interesting is even with those like one world dilemmas, most people don't feel great about them. Like there are very few people who are saying that it's like, one of their favorite parts. A lot of people are like leaning middling to negative. So something to think about in terms of like where STs are devoting time or like where focus is like if this one world, like these big one world dilemmas are something that people either can't access, and even the people who can access them don't think that they're the most fun. Like maybe it's just not worth, throwing as much time behind those things when there are other things that people would much rather like be able to go and dig into instead. All right. And then in terms of we asked people, about their opinions on PvP versus PvE, and like, are you how afraid of you are dying? I think that this is interesting to me, where you kind of look at this like people are mostly interested, like are fine with PvE, and most people are, still leaning kind of like middling to positive on the thing. And I have again kind of theories about PvP. PvP, as we mentioned, is like historically has been, very mechanical. And so that can feel very daunting. Maybe we see that if we advocate for more, advanced narration as a way for people to kind of resolve PvP, or give people tools or tips on how to kind of resolve PvP in a different way that doesn't require us getting White Wolf involved, so to speak, that like people would be more open to it, because PvP when it is kind of boiled down to its nuts and bolts, it is just a stat check. And like that's not fun when you're like, I'm here to live action role play and like build a story together. So I want to kind of paint that narrative as to why these numbers potentially look the way they do. PvE, I feel like, is something that is just more accessible to people. And like they're like, I do get to use the cool disciplines on my sheet in a way that like isn't going to make anybody mad or put me or my character at risk. And then the last piece of this that I wanted to dig into was like, how afraid are you of having your PC die in game? This is like a beautiful bell curve. It could not be a more beautiful bell curve. And I think that the way that I want to interpret this, and a note for me for next time, is that I'm going to ask a follow-up of like, what are the conditions that you would be okay with your character dying in? Of like, does it have to be like, what is a situation where you're like, this is it? Like, I'm okay with my character, like taking this end. And the way I'm interpreting that like bell curve is like people are like, I'm open to my character dying if it feels right in the story, if there is a good moment, if I feel like, I got to participate in that narrative, or in some way this feels thematically resonant with where I wanted my character to go. That's sort of my hypothesis behind the thing. But it is kind of good to see where you have people who are not like completely resistant to dying. That's definitely not the story that's being told here. But you do see that there is sort of this lean toward like, I would like some level of agency over that decision and how it happens. So very interested in kind of seeing again how these numbers change as we kind of get more people into the survey, and potentially like mechanical and cultural shifts continue to take place. The last, I think we're getting kind of close, is the player base is very open to seeing lots of flavors of VTM. As Peter had mentioned, the words that kind of sort of came up that we forgot are political and scheming. And frankly, I'm very ashamed of the both of us for forgetting those, given who we play and who we are as people. But something I wanted to call out here is that of the adjectives that we listed, it was also really helpful to see like how many on average were people picking? Like were, these very, very narrow? Did people have a narrow band of things that they liked? For the most part, people picked about 15 out of the 20 that we listed. So that really shows that like most people are very interested in, lots of different storytelling, lots of different themes that you could potentially raise in VTM. And there were a few at the bottom. Something that I wanted to kind of call out is like the three that were like least chosen, with like cruel, mean girl, slimy, ignorant. Like ignorant kind of makes sense. Slimy, I feel like, is an inherently gross word and people don't want to associate with it. But something like cruel and mean girl could potentially be rolled into something like political and scheming. And so it might be an issue of, terminology. But I think that this is a very, very powerful slide in terms of seeing where the most interest is in terms of what are the big wins. People want to see mysterious stories. They want them to be dangerous and impactful, scary, seductive and sexy, superhuman and supernatural, cool. These are the sorts of vibes, themes that people want to see. And like those are big wins if you're thinking about like how do I make a piece of PC content, or STs are thinking about, plot lines or like general vibes for things that they want to go into. This is a really, really helpful slide to kind of refer to.
Do we want to talk about Mean Girl as a bad term?
Yes, I sort of touched on it. I think that Cruel and Mean Girl, I'll dig into a little bit more, is like one, it's kind of unclear terminology. I think that for some folks, it might not be like a term that people are thinking about. It's also extremely gendered. And unfortunately, when you have extremely gendered terms in things, like you will you will see people kind of like either ping harder or off of something because something is coded in a particular way. So it's something to kind of consider here. It's like a revision for next time. Is that like cruel and mean girl might be one that we just like yoink out. We throw in political and scheming, and maybe we see people, add it back. They're like, no, I did actually mean mean girl. I said it with my whole chest. So we'll see. We also asked about, what are mature themes that you're open to seeing in Vampire LARP? People are very cool with vampire-based bigotry. Like if it is about a fictional thing where you're talking about someone's clan, their sect, their status, their political influence, they're like all day, every day. I am okay with dealing with discrimination on sort of like these fake fictional aspects of somebody's personality. Gratuitous descriptions of gore and violence also pretty open for most people. Where things start to get hazier are things like torture. Most people are like in that sort of like a lot of people are either extremely open or very open, but you definitely see more trepidation there than you would for gratuitous violence. And then people were mostly pretty negative about discrimination based on, real world identifiers and parts of your personality, parts of your identity. But there are still people who were open to it. And so it's something that I think is a good guideline to follow is like, don't come out of the gate with that. If you find somebody who is like, and you've had a conversation about like, oh, this is a theme that, I would like to explore either in this particular relationship with a character, like that's okay. But that's sort of like a pretty solid, like, we should check in here, given that most people, a good chunk of people in SID, are a little bit more trepidatious about, discrimination based on those real world aspects. And then the last one is just that like local SID players enjoy playing in person much more than online. Like when you look at this in terms of email RP, Discord RP, people are a little bit more more trepidatious about Discord RP, and that makes a lot of sense. It was it is the newest tool in SID's arsenal to kind of use as an outlet for RP. Email RP, people are, I would say, more neutral on the thing. It's not nearly as as satisfying as being in person. A lot of people said outright, they're like, I will go out of my way to like have these scenes in person instead of online because it isn't as fulfilling. Even just hanging out in character outside of the house was rated more positively than Discord RP and email RP. And it is worth mentioning that like this survey very intentionally, very much focused on local players. I am a remote player myself, and I'm like, I'm not going to take the survey because like this is very intentionally supposed to be for people who are like on site, enjoying the game, paying site fees. And so I think it's important to kind of highlight like that is your core, that is the game's core, and they are not getting the same sort of fulfillment out of, email or Discord RP. And that's not to say that it's not good supplementary,
I want to chime
but
in real
that's
quick
not
too.
the bread. Go for it.
Again, this came out, we polled on this before we went to twice a month. And
Mhm.
I think that there was such a big pressure on getting us that second in-person play game that there was some resentment towards Discord. And I think this might be one of the things where Discord satisfaction levels come up because we do have the 2 a month. And I think our Discord game that we've been having has really spiked in content on that. So again, product of several months ago, and us getting that second game, I think is going to radically change the way a lot of these numbers look on the next poll.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, this is probably an issue of timeliness. But yeah, I think that overall, like Discord RP in particular is probably getting a little bit more flack here. If I was to hypothesize where it lands, it might like just land in the same range of satisfaction as email RP, where it's like this is a secondary outlet, but by no means would, SID players replace that in-person aspect with, a digital outlet and feel just as satisfied.
And a shout out real quick, Ged and Kat. This was taken before they did their huge Discord UI overhaul, where they really cleaned up the rooms and flow and put a lot of work into making that Discord product a lot more presentable and user friendly.
I believe so. Yeah. I think I got to join like literally the day before that got rolled out. So I have never known another
Spoiled.
world. I'm very spoiled. Yes, you guys did amazing work. It is much, much easier to navigate in there, and the relative like Discord fluency of the server has definitely increased since then as well. All right. So we are at the end I have two more slides here and kind of as a like sort of a summary. So what are the kind of key takeaways? What are the main things, the big findings in this? And it's that SID's growing community of welcoming members, quality role players are like that's the flywheel. If we were going to take this really corporate and I became Vivian for a second, that is like the bread and butter of SID, and it's kind of the beating heart is that it's a great community. The people that are here really want to be here and really want to bring other people in. You have this wonderful generational net in terms of, people who have been playing a really long time. You have new players who have mixed previous experience with VTM. And there's just great stuff, great quality in the water, and it's just going to build on itself. However, that growing doesn't come without growing pains, and that's going to be things like new player onboarding experience in character and out of character, game logistics in terms of documentation, ST availability, etc., and then just bridging that gap between veteran players and new blood on sort of multiple fronts of in character understanding, finding ways to kind of connect them, because especially when you think about that sheet disparity, it feels like oh, even if I have friends who are, older players, or are more tenured, maybe they're off doing other things that like I'm not going to be able to get involved in. So like finding those opportunities to kind of like, how do we get a better mix of people in a particular scene or in a particular plot based on things? I think of things like the Malkavian stuff, for example. Like there is a big mixed bag of Malkavians, and we love them. And it seemed like that was a really cool bonding thing to have. And it's one that kind of branched across, multiple generations of the game. And so it's cool to see that. When you think about the kinds of play that SID players are looking for, they're interested in that gritty personal drama, PC driven and focused like storytelling. They want those small plots. They want to really dig into why and what their characters and their friends' characters, why they're doing what they're doing, and just having things kind of like zoomed in at that level, so that they feel like they're really part of telling the story that's happening here. Local level plots that are accessible or geared toward news players, maybe not entirely wholesale, but just having them as options, finding ways to get them involved. And then in terms of those themes, like they're interested in a lot of different flavors of VTM. There are definitely some winners that are, the most popular with people, but very, very open, and very interested in exploring sort of like those themes around, discrimination or dealing with oppression kind of based on, these in-world characteristics that are taken out of that context of like, oh, I'm not dealing with, oppression because I am a gender minority or because of my race. It's because I am this clan instead. And so there's an interest in that. Yeah, fictional discrimination only. So the last slide that we have here is sort of recommendations and opportunities for improvement. The things that we think or that the survey and kind of like the findings that we have here kind of tell us we should kind of focus on based on what players said is things like focusing on firming up documentation and processes, better downtime process, checklists of like all of the things that people might need to know, all of the Google groups, all of the relevant court emails, all of the things where you're like, hi, if I don't have a person who knows all of this stuff, how am I ever going to find it? Because it's not even in One World's documentation on their Byzantine website, it's very, very difficult to get to that kind of information. So having SID be a one-stop shop and like maintaining some of that stuff internally is just going to help us be successful. Pivoting to kind of, again, those fewer plots about imminent domain threats, more stuff that is about, players' interest in drama and politicking. It also potentially is like less admin work in general to like have things be based on player things. It's a GM trick. If you can get your players to make their own plot, it's less work for you, which is great. And people are asking for it. Considering building staff or having dedicated staff just for admin coverage is a consideration of like having someone who is dedicated to new player onboarding or for keeping up with, documentation changes as they happen at the national level for One World. And then building systems potentially for those in character and or, out of character mentorship opportunities. And before I show the appendix and jump into stuff, Peter, anything else to speak to?
No, a lot of the stuff, I think most of us showing up to game on a regular basis could have said, yeah, I think this would have been a popular opinion. And it's nice to see that reinforced, especially the feel good, like people are here because our players are awesome and welcoming, and there is a lot of good mentorship. And the cool thing about the survey then is just wow, I never would have seen some of this stuff coming. And me as a player, we jump back a couple of those slides, like the interest in subject material, where it's like mysterious real big on the left, mean girls real small on the right. Like, okay, cool. If I'm trying to calibrate a play experience, stuff like that becomes such a strong tool of like, what can I lean into where I'm going to get the most bang for my buck and be able to approach the most players with my actions. So yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah. Well, the great news is that's about it. I have an appendix in the back here of all of the graphs. I also have sort of like the sample demographics that we have here of sort of like the median and average age, how many people kind of fit in to it. I mean, it
That
be
feels
like
hard to
that.
look at. Ouch.
But something I want to highlight here is when you look at, the tenure of how long people have been here, people who have like less than 2 years, not that different from how many people have, 11 plus years of tenure. And when you look at like SID tenure, and I do want to caveat that there are some people who are like, I have less than 1 year of tenure in SID because I took a break and I came back X number of like months ago. And so that was something that I had to calibrate. But that number, even with those folks in mind, is a lot more even than you would think. So we have a very wide range of folks who kind of got involved in the survey. And I think even at sort of a high level of, eyeballing it, all things considered, it's not the worst sort of sample to have of SID. SID is very varied, is the best way to put it. But yes, speaks to things like participation in terms of, most people are primarily playing in person. Most respondents also said that, they played in all the available outlets of, event games, email, Discord. Also speaks to sort of the relative enfranchisement of the player base. I'd be very interested in seeing if those numbers stay the same if we get more people. And SID folks are just like, yes, there's 70 of us and we roll up everywhere. We will descend on a place because that's honestly what it feels like
Mm.
sometimes. But yes, in terms of what else is available, all of the graphs that I showed are in the back of the appendix. I would encourage folks to be able to kind of like go through, even if you can't like stay right now, because I know that we're over time. I'm still going to stay on to take questions and speak to stuff, and I will be available in perpetuity to answer questions about this data. So please send them through whatever means is comfortable for you.
And again, chiming on that, I mean, we had how many responses when we started formulating this? Was it? Because I think
About
that
25-ish. I cleaned out a few. There were like a few where it's like, oh, I submitted this early.
yeah, because I think it was like 33 total, and a lot of those were like it started, it stopped. I didn't know
Mhm,
there was a timeout on it.
mhm, mhm.
Those are it's great. I mean, that's a strong response. We can definitely see some real opinions here. But when we're talking about a game where at times we're hitting 85 people showing up, a closer exam of like, are Lancaster players really different than Columbus? But if you're showing up every game, your opinion matters. And we didn't exclude anybody from this. It was open. We just wanted to make sure that people were being clear, like, hey, I'm a remote Discord player from the Mid Atlantic, and I'm coming to your Discord games, or I'm in here day in and day out. I'd love to get more numbers, but as we said in the beginning, people who are willing to sit down and answer a 30-question survey where we get pretty intricate in this thing. That is going to have an availability bias on answers because they are the most, they want those opinions out there. And that's a type of person. And we want all types of people replying in on this stuff because we want to have as much fun with as many of the players that are showing up and putting their time in as possible.
Exactly. And ideally, I mean, the goal of having any of this is to like start a dialogue. It's so that when we have discussions about game or we're planning things, there are like pieces of data that you can have in the room to be like, well, this is something that we took, 2 months ago, and like instead of this being a vibes-based discussion, it can be a data-informed discussion. So yes, really, really hopeful for what this can do. Would really love to run this again, and probably put together kind of just like a firmer timeline of like, when this thing needs to go into field. Everything this time around was like me and Peter putting everything together from scratch. So like everything from like the design of this slide deck to everything was all done from scratch. And we won't have to do that again next time. So it will be a much faster turnaround, and we can talk about, the cadence of putting up surveys and getting data to people.
And hopefully, there was some discussion on the out of character list about what these surveys could be used for, and going in with bad faith intent on it, which was absolutely not anything that we had on our radar. We want to make that data fully available for people to see where this is coming from, and just reinforce that, we're doing this for game health. It's knowing the problems now doesn't give us a magic wand, be like, we need 5 more storytellers, and boop, who's going to back off of the game when it's the most fun it's ever been and say, you know what, I want to go take this hobby and turn it into work. Like, these are there's some difficult problems in here to address, but again, we've got data on the table to really kind of nudge things along now.
For Bridget's question, which I love, for people to kind of get involved, I love the idea of taking suggestions from folks. When we get that started and spun up, if we get basically like hey, like we do want this to continue to be like done in good faith with, the powers that be, we'll get a thread started and be like, okay, like we're planning on putting up the survey on this day. We're taking suggestions in this thread until this date so that like I have some time to kind of, make sure things are programmed and everything's working properly. But yes, love the idea of, having suggestions and hearing people's voices so that this is very much a collaborative effort. We're here for collaborative storytelling, and science is best done when it is also done collaboratively. So let's see, any other questions? Were there questions I missed? You asked for demographics, and we had that.
Yeah, I had a thought that I first of all, I really appreciate you guys putting this together. This is all really awesome. One thought that I've been thinking, like having just as we've been talking about more admin work, is I'm wondering if there's a way to help with that admin work in a way that doesn't take away from time at live games. Because if we can have like the STs sending out to people like, between games, like, hey, you have this many points of contacts on your sheet, or you have this influence that lets you gather this information. Like, I know right now the STs are more or less reactive to what the players request because they have such a huge flood of information coming in. But if there is a way to just like everybody who has media level 1 influence, you guys get this, this plot hook, then it's like new players get plot and they have a way to interact, like something to interact with when they start the game every week, instead of like them having to go to the storyteller, wait 30 minutes, find something. So I think that could be a cool suggestion, is just like a blanket email out or like message on Holler. Like, if you have this contact or this information, or you have this clan friendship, whatever it is, like you get this plot hook.
I'm gonna be very real with you. I totally agree. We did this in my troop game when I was in college, and it was awesome. We had that system of like, if you have, this much of this influence, or even just a minimum of one, like you would get those like, oh, you sense this thing, and like it would be handed to you at game. We actually had we had a newspaper, which I honestly love that the newspaper here is just player driven. But part of the newspaper, at least in our other troop game, in my college troop game, was that it was the way like that STs fed us plot in like a very non-linear way. Like, it wasn't them saying like, this is the plot hook, come check this thing out. But I totally agree with you, Jonah. I think that like more of those things. I love the way that you frame that as like proactivity of like, these are things that you can hand to players and they don't have to ask for them. They're just going to have them, and then they can, leverage that in whichever way that they want to, or decide not to engage with it because they have other things to do that week.
And to be clear, right now, there's no staff that I'm aware of that's actually sitting on this. So I don't want to turn this into like this is what needs to happen, because
Mm-mm.
none of us are staff and we have no ability to impact that. But I would say take those suggestions, email the staff, or go in your playroom and do it. One of the big things that I think the survey really reinforced is that onboarding sucks. Onboarding with One World by Night is fucking terrible. We've got 25 years of bylaws and packets and bullshit. Stuff is spread all over the place. And even if you know the website and how to use it, it's difficult to get. Some of the packets you can't even get without the storytellers handing it to you. And locally, I don't think we're really clear on what goes into character building. And we've got a lot of new players right now. And I think there's an opportunity for people who have gone through this process. Because I helped Bruce, I helped Jasmine, and just sitting there, I'm like, man, I've been doing this however many years. I don't know where to start with this stuff. I haven't made a character in 7 years. This is rough. People have freshly gone through the process. Like, make a little diary or make a list of like what helped, what needs to be a part of this character generation process. And I think we're going to have to, as a player base, collaboratively build onboarding documents that are going to comprehensively help new players walk through this process, because expecting a volunteer storyteller to sit down and put the 15 hours or whatever is going to go into doing this the right way is not really feasible. It's not going to happen. These storytellers have kids, they've got spouses, they've got day jobs, and with a labor of love, you're going to get a better return on investment. So I think just we as a group, you just start Google Documents and start collectively putting something together to help new people coming in know exactly where to look, what not to waste their time on, and centralized document locations. Because you can't just say, hey, here's laws of the night, make a character. Like, clan restrictions and all that other stuff, it's a nightmare.
Oh yeah. Making Ventru is very fun. It's super duper great. Yeah, yes, thank you, Bridget. It's a good time. And like the more admin points of contact you need, it's like the longer of a slog it is. And I think to Shaq's question, I love is who, if you have ideas about logistics and admin, like uh, uh, about either getting involved or recommendations, I think that it's good to reach out to STs, admin, in your player room. Those are the places where it's like that are the best. And I think that that's like where they should keep going. And just reaching out to them because they can't know what they don't know, so to speak. And I think to Peter's point too, to kind of create that like, what are things that we can do? Because I think Sid throughout the survey is basically has said many times over, like, we are very dedicated to this. We want this to be better. You see that in GE being a fucking barn burner. Like, people got so involved. People who aren't involved in admin, who aren't involved in court, I see. And so I think that like, yeah, let's put together this documentation ourselves to a certain extent where it's like, if nobody is expecting you to do it, there is nobody asking for it, and then you have time, which is sort of like this survey in a lot of ways, right? Like, no one had asked us to do the thing. I definitely would have liked to have put it together sooner, but like just doing the thing and like getting kind of feedback on it later, asking for forgiveness instead of permission, but like still acting in like the best faith possible, I think is not a bad way to go about this, because there is only so much admin support we can expect in a group this large. And like, in terms of putting together new player documentation, like, a lot of the folks at the top who are in admin have not been a new player in a very long time. Like, you might actually know the lived experience and like what you actually needed to know off the bat and what you like couldn't answer yourself better than some of them would.
What do you need to know as a new player coming in to show up and play and decide, is this something I want to put more time in? You don't need to know venture societies, backgrounds, and stuff that I, as an experienced player, might be like, no, that's actually you need to know the stuff about the Tremere houses. No, you don't. You need to know how many points to put on your sheet realistically and what books you're allowed to use. I want to talk real quick. Sorry to cut you off, brother, but I want to talk real quick. The new player resource hub is great. I do forget about it. An issue with that, and I don't know if there's a way around it with Discord with permissions, people come on the Discord server. I don't know if they have access to that new player hub immediately. And when I have people emailing me, hey, I'm interested in this, or they go through Facebook and they're like, hey, I'm kind of interested in a new player. What do I need to get started? Like, I would like to have a PDF that I can say, here, read this. Because now I don't have to worry about them. Are they going to get on the Discord? Are they going to get the approval? Are they going to know what to click? Blah, 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 blah. And then steer into the resource hub from there.
Yes. And I think that is another great point of like we have sort of these hubs, and I feel like that hub got a lot of love at the very, very start, and there was a ton of stuff that got added. And I think that it's like that is where, if we build out more documentation, where it should live. Like that is a perfect resource where it is like, hey, anybody who is in the game, especially new players, are you looking for a weird packet that you can't find anywhere else? Like this is where to go. And I really liked that in particular that you called out, Peter, of there is just a lot of stuff in some of those documents that like a new player shouldn't be inundated with. Like I'm going to talk to you from the perspective of someone who has like had to think about the question of how do you teach somebody magic or D&D, and it's like you make so much of the stuff that you need to know on the back end just not something they have to worry about at first, because inundating people with a ton of information is a great way to give them analysis paralysis and to get them thinking about things that really shouldn't be relevant to them at the time. It can just make the process feel more
Intimidating.
daunting. Yes. So yeah, I think those are sort of questions that came out on the jump and some recommendations we have. Looks like there's another new message. Perfect. Yes. Education Hub was available. Perfect. All right. Any other questions from folks? Any last discussion items before we wrap up?
This was awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys so much.
It's Jasmine that did all the work on this. I'm happy that I was able to kind of help getting the ball rolling, but Jasmine's the powerhouse behind making this look as absolutely professional as it was, and a lot of the deeper data analysis on this. So huge value add to the game to have someone who is 2 time zones away and willing to put the time in for our fantasy vampire game. We're run out of a sweatbox church. Thank you very much for all your hard work on this.
Thank you guys. Thank you for letting me be a part of the thing, and Primogen from 3 time zones away. This was very, very fulfilling. I don't get to use my skills in passion projects very often, so very, very happy to do it again. It's a very worthwhile group to do it for. So I hope this is useful, and again, open to any questions to anyone who is on this call or watching from the future. So thank you.